Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Tonight I'm announcing that this channel is going to be branching off into video analysis as well as acoustic analysis. And I'm doing that primarily to augment what the acoustic analysis has shown us. And I figure that if I can find video evidence that also correlates to the acoustic evidence, then we got two different approaches to verifying what I've been claiming with the acoustic analysis. I'm going to start with the Dan Blazarian video where they're over here next to the patrol officer's car with some people hunkered down beside the east side of it on Guile Street. And I'm going to start with the flash seen at 2 minutes 5 seconds 0.223 seconds into that film, which is apparently or believed to be a flash from room 134, which occurred during the 6 single 308 shots from that room. I'm not going to do anything observation wise tonight. I'm just going to tell you what my plans are, what some of the things I'm going to be doing, and fill you in as to my approach. I promised that I would branch out into this visual stuff a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, and I promised it because there's so much evidence out there visually that I feel is related to gunshots that this channel could benefit from it. I also feel that there's a substantial lack of rigor in the techniques people apply to analyze some of the videos. That's not to say all channels are doing a bad job, or even some channels are doing a bad job. It's just that I think that the state of the art, so to speak, can be improved. And for example, we could, if we wanted to know what the source of a light in a video is, we could take a very small portion of it, which encompasses a small portion of the video frame, look at the portion of light that we're interested in, and perform a spectral analysis on it. And very similar to what I do with Sonic Visualizer, that same thing can be done with these videos. And what it will tell you is that the light that is being analyzed is composed of certain individual frequencies, and that gives you a frequency signature for light. And if two light sources have the same frequency signature, then there's most likely something related between the two. And at least it's another corroborating piece of evidence to say that this is somehow related. And if they don't have the same spectral graph, then more consideration needs to be given as to whether there's any relationship between the two flashes and whatnot. Now, I'm not abandoning any of my current research with acoustic analysis. In fact, I'm very, very close to doing a video on graphical presentation of the boxing algorithm, which I covered a week or so back, more than a week actually. And that'll be not eye-opening, but it'll be very visual and very confirmative of what I said about the boxing algorithm in general. Namely, you can do a rough localization of a source of a sound using very simple graphs and very simple algorithms once you've established or synchronized multiple videos. And I'd like to bring the same type of style to video analysis that I brought to acoustic analysis. Common sense, mathematics, physics, and try to avoid lots of speculation. And that's going to be a little bit difficult at times because I'm going to have to, since this is a whole learning curve for me now, I really don't have any expertise per se in performing video analysis. So I'm going to have to learn right along with the viewers. But I do have an engineering background, and I know that whatever I do with acoustics, there's a similar or analogous process that can happen with videos. And I'll probably have to learn a little bit about programming computer vision algorithms in Python and things like that. But right off the top of my head, I can think of dozens of things that could be done that aren't being done that I feel would add credibility to many researchers' channels. Namely, well, spectral analysis was one. We could do a frame by we could take the videos, break it into the frames, and then do a difference between each frame with some criteria, maybe a difference between every 5th frame or 10th frame, and we could see what the changes are in the video, which would highlight just the changes. And from that you can get a better idea of what's changing from video to video. You know, people have already applied video stabilization techniques, which try to minimize that the movement between camera. But even after that, what's changing in the frames? And those things which are the same are probably less interesting to someone like myself who's looking for very quick events. Similarly, we could apply standard video techniques for finding the edges of things that are happening, which, if there's any non-chaotic form involved in a video, edge detection will probably highlight that. And so there's a lot of things, you know, there's dozens and dozens of filters and algorithms that can be applied, just even in I don't know, you know, pick your favorite video editor, has dozens of them. So, and I'm going to be focused on 2 areas. One, information that's never been presented before, and 2 is information that's already been presented on different channels, but can benefit from a little bit more rigorous analysis. Now, let me say up front that the first thing we'll look at is that flash from supposedly window 134. I do not know the outcome of this research. I have already looked at the acoustics for that shot, and I've made the assertion that it was, you know, coming from that area, that it was a gunshot sound. But I've also made some other assertions which are going to have to be tied into the visual, and I think the combination of those two might, I say might because I don't know, be very revealing. And I think that even with this first video, we're going to lay some foundation work on what should be done with a visual analysis and what should not be done. And along with that flash, I'm going to also cover many sources of light from many frames, covering you know, pretty much the entire time that the photographer or videographer, as you would, was close to that patrol cam, because there's a lot of interesting phenomena that we can see there that is going to set the stage for further video analysis. One example is a phenomenon called lens flare. Back when I first entered college with very few dollars in my pocket, about the 2nd or 3rd semester in, I took the job as the teaching assistants for the first year physics students. And along with that came the responsibility for maintaining the lab, and the lab had a darkroom associated with it. And so I thought it was a good time to take my dad's old Leica camera and take one of the artsy craftsy photography classes. So I did, and the guy teaching it was this nice old gentleman. He had connections out at one of the local military bases, so we could get film that, you know, had 10,000 ASA or or infrared or things like that that most photography classes didn't have access to. But of course, back in this day, the 2 standards were Tri-X, which is a black and white high grain, reasonable ISO rating, and Kodachrome, which is the standard slow ISO preferred film for both professionals and amateurs at the time. And so I learned a lot about, you know, how to change the developing process, and I did all my developing, all my printing, and all that sort of stuff. But I also learned from practical experience that these little hexagonal shapes that occurred constantly through many pictures and prints came from the 6-piece aperture in my lens. Now, I didn't really discover that until I switched from the standard Leica camera to a OM1 with a 70 to 210's Vivitar lens, which, as many of you will recall from that time period, was, you know, it was a variable focal length lens that was, kind of weighty actually. It was heavier than the whole camera itself, particularly an Olympus. And being an interchangeable lens system, when you pull it off, you can push on the little button that closes the aperture down. And if you look inside there, it's all these miniature blades that are all closing down onto a fixed opening called the aperture. And you could see the actual sides of the aperture. And the larger the f-stop, the smaller the aperture. And so it was easy to correlate by looking through that lens what was happening, namely that some errant light was making its way through that aperture and forming an image of the aperture. And so that's one phenomena of lens flare. There are two or three other phenomena caused by lens flare, but that lens flare, then the errant light that comes in produces images, maybe multiple images on the same photo of that aperture in the shape of the aperture. And we see that in some of these videos. It's not a Vivitar, Series 1 lens, but the same holds true of any lens that's employing a variable aperture process with physical dimensional apertures. All right, that's just one example. And of course, I'll be correlating the visual data with the acoustic data, which is one of my main beefs with people that are focusing on the helicopter stuff. They have all these instances of flashes from all different directions, all different locations, but yet I've seen very little hardcore correlation with each individual shot. In fact, I've seen none of it. And that seems to me to be a foundational thing, that if you're promoting a flash in the sky as proof of somebody making a shot, you want to at least correlate it precisely, including the math involved, with the acoustic data where you hear the shot. And I think that when I do that type of stuff, there's going to also be some very eye-opening discoveries made, and I don't think it's going to benefit some of the helicopter theories. And of course, I've got to look at all the work that I've done to incorporate it into some of this visual stuff. I have to look at the visual stuff that other people have done, because I don't want to reinvent every wheel. And along the line somewhere, I'll probably establish some fairly objective criteria for evaluating visual information. Now, I don't call it evidence, because it's just visual information leading to an observation that may or may not be predicted or supportive of some theory. And of course, along with that, just like with the lens flare, there's going to be other visual phenomena which needs a lot of research to understand, explain, and incorporate into any of these analyses. And as usual, you'll see graphs and charts and timelines and all that types of stuff, just as though the information were acoustic data. It just happens to be visual. What we hear with our ears, we can also see with our eyes in a similar fashion. So when we do these timelines of visual information, I think there's a great value to be gained there, because everybody has a kind of a concept from one side or the other what's going on when and why, but yet we don't see a conglomeration of timelines that puts it together much. And this will be putting together some of the visual timing with some of the acoustic timing that I've done extensively. All right. So we talked about spectral analysis, talked a little bit about lens flare. I haven't talked anything about lens coloring, which is another aspect of lens flare, where the errant light coming into the lens can actually color in some fashion the image of the frame that's being recorded. And of course, then you got your standard movement of the camera you have to deal with, and you have to understand the ins and outs of a camera. You have to know what its limitations are, its sensitivity, what the lens, how the lens is constructed, how the aperture is constructed, and all the various settings that may or may not have been applied at the time. And then fundamental to all this, of course, is a non-trivial understanding of both light reflection and light refraction, because without at least a basis in physics for those two things, there's very little hope of understanding some of these more complicated things like lens flare. So you already talked about edge detection, frame differences, and if I get really ambitious and really productive, I may actually delve into establishing 3D models from these two-dimensional sources. There's a lot of work that's already been done in that. In fact, the Vera people have done some of that. They can actually reconstruct a pseudo 3D model using these videos that are only two-dimensional. And the last but not least, of course, will be improved techniques for locating in longitude and latitude, like Google does, these video recording locations. Because to do any research in acoustics, you need an not extremely accurate. The better the accuracy of your location, the better the accuracy of your acoustic research results. So that's kind of where I'm headed. Like I said, I'm going to start off with something we think we all know something about, and see where my investigation leads, and that'll be the flashes actually that are in and around the time frame at which the fourth shot from the room 34 occurred. And there are, flashes in the sky in this video that need to be looked at very, very close, in fact, to that fourth shot. And so you can naturally ask the question, is there any correlation between the two? And I think we'll have a good time. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring you up to speed. It'll be a couple, 3 days. Well, I don't know. It'll be a little bit before I put out my first video, because I already started looking at the video itself, and there's just a ton of things to cover before you actually get down to making any conclusions about what that flash really is. It's very simple, and we'll do that first to say we've got a flash, we've got a sound, there's a time difference or delta between them. The speed of sound, that we could classify it as a muzzle blast, if we can, and say that, well, the speed of sound between that distance is this, and this looks like it could be that, or it looks like it isn't that. And then you could try to do the same thing with the supersonic crack geometry and model. And then you could do the same thing for the other flashes that occur or should have occurred for some of the other shots or some of the other flashes. And it'll be exciting. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a heads up, and we'll grab you in the next video. And take care.